Argentina today invaded and seized the Falkland Islands, which have been under British rule for nearly 150 years. Britain promptly broke diplomatic relations with Argentina, sent several of Her Majesty's warships steaming south, and appealed to the United Nations.
For the purpose of avoiding bloodshed and property damage among the population, we hope that you shall act prudently. Our concern is for the welfare and safety of the people of the Malvinas. This was the message from the Argentine Armed Forces.
4 a.m., April the 2nd, 1982. Argentine Navy cameramen film their invasion of the Falkland Islands. Frogmen landed first from a submarine, followed later by the main assault force. It was an historic day for Argentina.
Where are you giving this report from, Ali? Are you standing up, sitting down, or what are you doing? The situation, as you might hear, is that the radio station has now been taken over. We have 3 Argentine women.
We have everything recorded in 2 tapes.
Yes.
Okay, for the station.
Just a minute. If you take the gun out of my back, I'm going to transmit it to you. If you take the gun away. But I'm not speaking with the gun in my back.
By 7 a.m., after fierce fighting, Government House was completely surrounded. The Malvinas are a national cause in Argentina. Pupils in primary school learn about their lost heritage, of how the British stole the islands from them in 1833. Youngsters are shown that the islands are part of Argentina's continental shelf. When news of the invasion reached Buenos Aires, the crowds went wild. The military regime's record of violent repression, the economic crisis, all were forgotten overnight. The national dream of reoccupying the Malvinas had been realized.
Good evening. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. The confrontation between Britain and Argentina over the Falkland Islands is escalating quickly. Here is how and why. Argentina is beefing up the invasion force that last Friday captured the islands. A 40-ship British armada, primed for possible war, set sail.
The flagship is the huge new aircraft carrier Invincible. As well as its sophisticated jets and helicopters, the Invincible is carrying a member of the royal family, Prince Andrew, a helicopter pilot. Ahead is an 8,000-mile journey to the South Atlantic. Another group of British ships has already started south from Gibraltar. Along the way, they'll link up, forming an armada of some 35 to 40 ships. The muscle in the fleet will be provided by 2 aircraft carriers and 5 destroyers. The most deadly part of the force, though, the nuclear submarine Superb, is already somewhere near the Falklands, waiting far below the surface. Also waiting is the Argentine invasion force, numbering about 14 ships. Among them, a single aircraft carrier, a ship sold by Britain in 1948. But it's equipped with modern jets, the American-built Skyhawk. The Argentine force is also well equipped with modern missiles. In fact, they have the same missiles carried by the British. Argentina's 3 aging submarines, though, are no match for the British nuclear subs. There are 3 possible strategies. The Argentine Navy could sail out to meet the British, engage them in battle some distance from the Falklands. More likely, the British will try to establish a naval blockade of the Falklands, cutting off the invading force from the Argentine mainland, hoping to force a settlement without firing shots. A third, probably less likely possibility is a British invasion of the islands.
If you look at it on the 3 counts of numerical superiority, the Royal Navy has it. On the question of weapon systems, again, the advantage is with the Royal Navy.
Either way, if the 2 fleets do clash, it will be the first battle in naval history fought with long-distance missiles and nuclear submarines. John Blackstone, CBS News, London.
Tonight, the British government broadcast a radio message through the BBC World Service advising British citizens to leave Argentina.
The British task force continues to sail south, preparing for battle if all else fails. The bulk of the force, the best of the British Navy, is still heading south. At least 53 ships are involved overall, among them 15 warships and 26 others requisitioned by the government. Our reporter, Brian Hanrahan, is on the flagship HMS Hermes. This is his report of life on board during the first half of the voyage.
HMS Hermes put to sea in haste. Her crew scrambling back from leave, hundreds of tons of stores piled aboard. The first hours were crazy ones, tidying up people and equipment, and then buckling down to building a fighting ship. The Navy had boarded every Harrier it had and scoured its ground stations for the pilots to fly them. Skilled combat pilots though they were, they needed first to recover the skill of operating on a moving deck at sea. The exercise also meshed the squadrons into the ship's system. They meet through the flight deck officer. Brightly clad in yellow jacket, he marshals the aircraft with the clarity of a mime artist, trying to keep planes and people apart, Harriers and helicopters airborne simultaneously. Constant drills day and night sharpen reaction, squeezing minutes off response times. In flight controllers everywhere on the ship, asbestos masks and gloves are worn to protect against the flash of fire or explosion. But the direction of the flight deck continues as the crew learn to go on, increasing in efficiency despite the cumbersome precautions. As the ship churns steadily south, a bustling island on an empty sea, the crew becomes more thoughtful. The news reaching us from home suggests that war is becoming thinkable, and Hermes, the flagship of the fleet, will be a primary target. There's a real chance that all this drill and practice will be needed. This is no longer a game. Easter Monday, and the Harriers are back on the hockey pitch. The pilots concentrate on combat. They go off, operationally drab, in flights 5 at a time to challenge each other. Up high in the skies, we see them battling, chasing each other's tails as they fight for the split-second advantage which could give them a kill. Fighting the Harrier is a complex business. It needs instinctive, intelligent reactions, instant coordination of radar, gun sights and controls. You have, said one pilot, to think like a train. Between the carriers, between the squadrons, between every pilot, there's rivalry. Invincible has one squadron, 8 Harriers to the 12 on Hermes. They believe they're the best, because they have to. They listen intently to their briefing. While the rest of the Navy fights as a coordinated team, they're the gladiators, off to single combat. Their lives depend directly on what they know and do. Invincible also houses 820 helicopter squadron with Prince Andrew as a co-pilot. Here's his helicopter lifting off.
Riflemen and GPMG gunners, pick your weapons, all dressed back. All I want left here, 66, 84 men.
With all the flying, the Marines aboard Hermes get only limited periods on deck. One of these they gave over to test firing of weapons from the stern.
Fire.
The first shot from a light anti-tank weapon won a round of applause. They went on to give a display to the ship's company. Their main anti-tank weapon, the Carl Gustav, was next. Even the cooks had a go with the spare one. All the other weapons, which hadn't been tested recently, were fired off together. Machine guns and SLRs in a clattering broadside. And the value of the morning was proved when they found one rifle that didn't work and needed replacing. Its defense, it relies on its aircraft and escorting ships. In contrast, HMS Broadsword, one of the Navy's newest and biggest frigates, fairly bristles with missiles. She's our goalkeeper, She carries one of the world's most effective defense systems and operates close to the carrier to protect her. For several hours, the captains maneuvered within 100 yards of each other while the Marines practiced their assaults from the flight deck. With helicopters buzzing about, it required all the delicacy of the diplomatic dance going on between London and Buenos Aires. The equator provided another few light-hearted hours, necessary relief from all the work. The Navy likes crossing the line, and not even the prospect of war could keep them from welcoming King Neptune, who, as usual, abused the hospitality. With so many men aboard, scant ceremony or time was wasted on individuals. The novices were captured, smeared with the most appallingly sticky concoction, and dunked into seawater by the hundred. At dawn, the Harriers demonstrated their skills and their weapons. A smoke target in the sea was bombed and rocketed. The escort group lined up with the carrier to watch. Flashing low past the bridge, the Harriers took aim on a flare in the sky. Their heat-seeking missiles arced across the sky, momentarily brightening the target as they hit. The Harrier pilots were enjoying themselves after 2 weeks' hard work, putting on a show for their audience.
And while the crew might miss the target, it looked increasingly likely that the Argentinians would hit the Vulcan. When Baldwin received the latest intelligence on the air defenses at Port Stanley, it made sober reading. The dossier revealed that the Argentinians had state-of-the-art weaponry, including the Tiger Cat, built by the British.
We were going in against the Argentinians with really modern radar-laid guns, big shells, explosive shells that they could fire at goodness only knows how many per second, which could easily shoot a Vulcan out of the sky. And going in at low level at night, I didn't really see how we could survive it.
As the task force continues southwards, the government has given more details on the merchant ships.
With the task force a week away from the Falklands, Mrs. Thatcher still hoped that regular TV updates showing that the British meant business would be enough to send the Argentinians packing.
Troops have been going through their weapons drill in readiness for a possible landing on the Falklands.
The two Vulcan crews prepared to take off for their midway base on Ascension Island.
Please remove all trucks and ground equipment.
It was a miracle. In just 3 weeks, Waddington had gone from a peacetime base onto a full war footing, transforming near obsolete bombers into new fighting machines. Eight hours later, the two Vulcans were circling the British island of Ascension. This remote volcanic outpost was a perfect base for the attack on Port Stanley. Ascension had become the busiest airport on the planet. The Vulcans arrived to find a huge armada of 12 Victor aircraft, the refueling tankers that would take the Vulcan down to the Falklands. The plan is that this vast armada flies to the first refueling point. Half the Victors refuel the other half, one Victor refuels the Vulcan, and then those aircraft return to base. The procedure is repeated at the next refueling point, and again, until there's just one Victor left to refuel the Vulcan before its final run into the target.
And it was really a question of Victors refueling, Victors refueling, Victors refueling, and it went on and on and on. And all the time, the formation was being reduced as one Victor had given all its fuel and had to go back to Ascension.
We had never seen anything like this refueling plan.
Second Vulcan. 2308.
Withers starts refueling with the Victors. It's the first of 4 contacts over the 8-hour journey to the Falklands. But when the empty Victors start returning to Ascension, they make a terrible discovery. The aircraft are so low on fuel, they have barely made it back. Then, with 2 refuelings left, the sortie hits a major electrical storm.
Okay, I need to back off a little bit. Christ, this is difficult. It's all over the bloody place.
a miracle happened.
Contact.
I couldn't believe it. Not only did he get in, he stayed in.
Yeah, fuel flows again. That's it. Thank you, Bill.
Bob Tuxford, I take my hat off. Good job, Bob.
We felt dejected. We felt that all our efforts had been in vain.
In the Vulcan, Withers faces the hardest decision of his life, whether to give up the attack or press on and gamble the lives of his crew. Captain Martin Withers and his crew are within striking distance of the runway at Port Stanley, but their Vulcan bomber doesn't have enough fuel to get back to base.
In theory, we should have then gone back to Ascension and aborted the whole attack. But because we'd come this far and the whole force had come this far, Martin decided we would carry on.
I made it clear that that was what I wished to do. Nobody tried to say otherwise, so we pressed on.
It's time for the attack. Withers takes the Vulcan down to 300 feet to get under the Argentinian radar. But navigator Gordon Graham can't work out exactly where they are. All his navigation systems are showing different positions.
If we don't know where we are relative to the island, we could bomb anywhere. We could bomb the town itself.
They switch on the ground scanning radar to get a fix. But this risks the Vulcan being picked up by the Argentinian defenses.
On the radar screen, there was nothing.
Withers chances taking the Vulcan higher to see if that will help.
Bang! The Falkland Islands appeared right in the middle of the radar screen, only about a mile away from where we thought we were. However, just as we got up to about 500 feet, I suddenly picked out a search radar.
Echo found radar, 12 o'clock.
The Argentinians have spotted them. But there's no turning back. Withers must now climb up for the final run-in.
Pulled up using full power, fairly steep climb, to get to 10,000 feet. We had about a 20-mile run-in, and we felt very vulnerable because you're sitting there. They know you're there.
10 o'clock, jamming.
I pulled the visor covers down. We thought the flak would be coming up at us, you know, like you see in the war films. We hadn't done this before. Getting fairly close, we suddenly got a lock-on from one of their fire control radars.
So I thought, what can I do? So I switched on the -10 jamming pod, so that they'd be fooled into thinking we were in a different position.
I opened the bomb doors early to make sure there wasn't a problem with the doors themselves.
Nav radar Bob Wright checks the antique bombing computer. Its pulleys and bicycle chains must calculate to the split second when to release the bombs.
5.
As we got to about 2 miles away, and the airfield was still lit up, that's when the bombs started to drop off.
3, 2, 1. That's it.
And they dropped off at half-second intervals, 21 bombs.
From 10,000 feet, it'll take 20 seconds for the bombs to hit the ground.
Once the last bomb went, Martin pulled the stick climbing turn to the left to get away from any Argentinian air defense threats.
The sky opened up a short while after that with every gun blazing.
And as we climbed, you could see the flashes
obviously from the bombs going off.
We had no idea at that point whether the bombs had actually hit the runway.
They still have to find their refueling tanker in thousands of square miles of Atlantic, and they have only a few hours of fuel left. But just as they thought they were out of range of Argentinian missiles,
The whole of my radar warning receiver front sector lit up with threats.
unsure whether they are friend or foe, every anti-aircraft weapon of the British task force is now trained on the Vulcan.
1, contact Delta, over.
I opened up on my radio, passed the pleasantries of the day, good morning, and I passed the code word superfuse to let them know that we considered the attack had been a success.
This is 1, contact Delta, superfuse.
The task force stands down, while the code word is also picked up 4,000 miles away back on Ascension.
Suddenly out of the blue, somebody shouted, "Superfuse!" I mean, fantastic. I mean, there was elation everywhere.
In Bob Tuxford's Victor, rapidly running out of fuel, the Vulcan's transmission tells them that at least their efforts were not in vain.
This is 1, contact Delta, superfuse. Shit, he's done it!
The next thing I knew, the Victor rolled out right in front of us. I can't tell you how that felt. I can't tell you.
To me at the time, it was the loveliest sight in the world.
Just in time, Tuxford's Victor was also met by a refueling tanker. They'd survived. Withers and his crew had achieved the longest bombing raid in history.
We didn't hear whether we'd hit the runway until at least 24 hours later. We dropped 21 bombs, and the first one to explode was on the runway.
The bomb put an end to Argentinian ambitions to use the runway for fast jet attacks on the task force. But it had been a close call. Just half a second later in releasing the bombs, and they might have missed altogether. The impact of that one bomb was to be felt far beyond Port Stanley airfield. Frightened that their cities would be attacked, the Argentinians withdrew their fighters to the mainland. The result was fewer Argentinian air attacks on British troops and ships. But for the Vulcan, the Falklands War was its first and last action. 6 months after the war, it was scrapped. Withers' Vulcan 607 now rests in peace beside the runway at Waddington.